Lawyers of Reddit, what was your OIT moment in court? A lawyer I used to know was in court on a work injury case. The judge asked his client, just what is the nature of your injury? His client replied, I can't raise my arm this high anymore, while she raised her arm up to show just how high she couldn't raise it. I was prosecuting a contempt action in family court, something that basically never works, and everyone in the room could tell I was winning. The other side was unprepared, out of arrogance, and I was basically ripping this guy to shreds on cross-examination, which his lawyer didn't even think would happen, because he expected the case to be dismissed. At the end of the trial, the judge ruled for me and stated that she found the defendant's testimony to be untrustworthy. I was shocked at winning a contempt trial to begin with, but then this exchange happened. Defendant's attorney, Your Honor, now that you have found my client's testimony to be untrustworthy, I am requesting a continuance in order to prepare further witnesses. This concept is shocking in and of itself, because to even think you can bring more witnesses after you rest your case is laughable. Judge, you had your shot and you missed. Counsel. Defendant's attorney, Your Honor, there was no way I could have anticipated that you'd find my client's testimony untrustworthy, and as such, I didn't have the opportunity to prepare other witnesses in support of his position. Judge, that may be an argument for your career. Counsel. But it holds no water with me. See you this afternoon for sentencing. For those who didn't pick up on it, the judge basically told the lawyer on the record in front of his client that she expects him to get sued for malpractice because he ducked up so royally that it was mind-blowing on multiple levels. I was the defendant, representing a non-profit that I volunteered for. The plaintiff was a 60-something grandma who was looking for a retirement settlement after falling out of her jacked-up pickup truck in our parking lot. The premise of her case was that our parking lot was in bad shape. It was, and that she fell into a pothole and broke her leg, which resulted in her having to take Coumadin and diminished her enjoyment of salads at the Friday night fish fry. No, really, it was going along fine, until my lawyer put up a photo of the pothole, taken the day of the incident, filled to the brim with water, after a recent rain. He asked the lady if she had gotten her foot wet, to which she replied that she couldn't recall. He talked a little more about how perhaps if her foot wasn't wet, it might have been because she fell out of the truck and didn't really fall into the pothole. He asked again if her foot was wet, and she affirmed that yes, her foot was wet. The OIT moment came when he went back to his desk, flipped through her deposition and read the part where she was extremely adamant that her foot wasn't wet. Then he did some fancy legal stuff. The case was thrown out and I went back to work. I was the dumbass that almost screwed myself. I had 2 charges in 2 different courts. I accepted the first plea, which almost always carries probation, but my plea didn't have that condition. When it came time to accept the second plea, the prosecutor didn't include probation because she assumed my first charge put me on probation. She said as much to the judge, and me being a big dummy almost corrected her. My lawyer grabbed my shoulder and, "Ate you not?" told me to shut the duck up. She doesn't know. Reposting myself from years ago. Story from a friend of mine. He was defending a guy in court. Don't remember what he was charged with. The main witness for prosecution was on the stand and was asked if she could identify the defendant. She was scanning the courtroom and seemed confused. My friend was already silently celebrating because if she couldn't identify him, he could probably get all charge dropped. As he was mentally adding this case to the win file, he happened to glance over at his client, who had just helpfully raised his hand to make it easier for her to identify him. Even the judge facer palmed on that one. Never ask a question to which you don't know the answer. Prosecutor suggested to me client that the canned goods he had burgled were to be used to trade for drugs. Me thinking the idea ludicrous, asked my client whether he has ever traded food for drugs, to which he replied that he once exchanged a frozen chicken for heroin. Needless to say, I didn't win that one. Not OIT bad. OIT I can't believe she said that. First jury trial. Pretty serious charges. I'm cross-examining the alleged victim, and in answering my question she says, "Oh yeah, I lie all the time." Needless to say, I won that trial. I was just interning in court during law school, but I'm a lawyer now. Fight in a club. Someone had broken someone else's jaw. and had 6 friends with him that insisted he had been identified wrongly because he never had a beard and the victim said he had a beard. They used a very specific phrasing to the tune of "my friend doesn't have facial hair because he is a professional in the food industry and it would go against the regulations." After 3 of the witnesses had repeated the same exact phrasing, the judge stopped one to ask if he knew what a couple of the terms in that line meant, and the witness couldn't explain it. Defense lawyer got busted for instructing the witnesses. She'd also gotten the defendant to reject a plea deal that exchanged prison time for a fine and community service. Sitting in court, doing some plea paperwork with a defense attorney for a go-home plea agreement, where person is released from custody and doesn't have to do jail time. We hear this KSSSSSSSSSTT shuru to our left and we look to see his guy sitting in the galley all by himself. Sitting in the cloud of a biggest vape hit I have ever seen. Then has the audacity to tell the judge it went off in his hand. Do not pass go. Do not go free that day. I was at a hearing arguing that my client was wrongfully terminated because the employer failed to abide by the proper procedures. During the hearing, a witness for the employer tried to offer documents that were fraudulently altered in order to make it look like the proper procedure was followed. I noticed the alteration. Opposing counsel quickly got that witness out of the room, and after a quick adjournment, my client got a large settlement. Not exactly in court, but I was defending a juvenile robbery case, where there was very little evidence. There was supposed to be 2 guys, but they only picked up this one kid. He had no stolen property on him. He was picked up like outside his own house, wearing different clothes than the victim had initially said. This kid was on the honor roll at school. His family seemed kind and were involved. He wrote poetry and played instruments. I actually believed it was a legit mistaken identity case. I went to meet with one of the kid's mentors for a character reference, and he exactly matched the description of the other robber. Person I was representing was on trial for assault in the 3rd degree and DUI. In my state, A3 means you've assaulted an aid worker or police officer and is a felony. The allegations are that he was very verbally abusive to the officers and, at one point, kicked one in the face. We're sitting at the defendant's table and the officer is testifying about the statements my guy made to him, including some pretty horrific name calling. Out of nowhere, my client screams, "You're a ducking liar. Duck you son of a bitch." We lost that trial. Another time, the judge asked a client whether anyone had coerced him into pleading guilty, and he said yeah, my attorney. I about did my pants, but he laughed and said, "I'm joking, no." Watching a hearing when the defendant said, "I mean I did stab her, but it was a gentle stabbing." Opposing counsel was a nightmare. Everything late. His work was extremely subpar, and so forth. Accused me of lying multiple times when he had dropped the ball. During another hearing in which he did another dumb move, judge says, "I'm glad you are the last case on the call," and all of the other attorneys have left the room. So they aren't here to hear me say that you are a terrible attorney. We were just sitting around because of delay of some sort. Over the course of about 5 minutes, about 8 heavily armored sheriff's deputies quietly shuffled into the room and everyone was told they need to sit real ducking still until told otherwise. Another 3 big boys lead in the defendant. Small Italian American gentleman in shackles. He was up on a few pretty boring fraud charges. I'm guessing he had friends on the outside who wanted to speak to him. Also, there was the guy who called the male judge mom. He was funny. Now, but I was on a jury once for a murder trial. Got selected and the trial started almost immediately. Man was on charge with murdering his neighbor. They made their opening statements. There was even a bloody note. It wasn't terribly long, but they clearly put a lot of effort into their strategies and were ready for battle. First witness was called. It was the son of the man on trial. I forget the first question, but it didn't matter. He immediately broke down crying and invoked his 5th Amendment right. Everyone freaks out. Judge and lawyers were like, WTF. Jury had no clue what was going on, but we were quickly ushered out immediately after that. Few minutes later it was explained to us what happened. The judge declared a mistrial. The prosecutor must have suspected that the father was taking the fall for the son who actually murdered the neighbor, rather than risk losing. There was a mistrial while they sorted out who to actually charge and try. Edit. Destiny Outdoors provided a succinct explanation of the Fifth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment to the US Constitution provides that you cannot be forced to provide testimony that could be used to prosecute you for a crime. Lawyer here. I had a pre-trial conference at 9 AM at a court about 2 hours away, so I wake my ass up super early to drive in itty weather to the conference. I get there and we're waiting for the other, in town, attorney. All the while I'm grumbling to myself about how I'm from out of town and I can still make it on time. Finally the court calls the other attorney's office and gets a receptionist who tells us through tears that other attorney passed away the night before. Needless to say I was just happy to still be alive and we rescheduled for a few months later. I think this qualifies, though it wasn't me that was the lawyer. Got called for jury duty. Was at the jury selection phase, and they asked if anyone here thinks they should not, blah blah. Defendant was in the room. I raised my hand. The defending lawyer looked at me like oh this ought to be good and asked me to explain. I suggested I tell them in private. He insisted I tell the courtroom. I said, okay, I probably shouldn't be on this jury because I was on a previous jury for this man which returned a guilty verdict. Lawyer's face went to it. Commotion and a wait while they looked up records. Yep, verified. Whole jury was now tainted. Everyone goes home. And they start over. Not in court but a deposition. Plaintiff in a sexual harassment case that was suspected to be paid roleplay with her boss. Kept a very detailed sex diary on her work computer. At one point she was asked to read from the diary for the record and asked if she had written the accounts and if they were true. She was asked at several points if she wanted her new husband to leave the room while she did this, but declined. Let's just say it was extremely kinky. She confirmed it was true, and the only mention of her now husband was that he was boring in bed but she was going to marry him because she couldn't get her first, second or third choice. He ended up leaving on his own after she read that part out and confirmed it was him she was writing about. I'm not an attorney, but a reporter whose beat is the county courthouse, so I've had plenty of these moments happen in front of me. A guy was convicted of attempting to murder several police officers. At his sentencing, the prosecutor revealed the defendant got a prison tattoo while he was awaiting sentencing of a tombstone with the names of all the cops he attempted to kill. But the defendant still had the audacity to beg for a lenient sentence. He got a few hundred years in jail. Edit. Clarification in the third paragraph. I'm not a lawyer but I was a character witness for my childhood dog in a civil trial between our neighbors and my parents. Opposing counsel was questioning me. I wasn't even out of elementary school at the time. And he asked if our dog was aggressive. She was a Rottweiler and very loving and incredibly protective of me and my siblings. His final question to me is one I will never forget. He asked, "Did your father tell you what to say before you came into court today?" I responded yes. Then he asked, "What did he tell you to say?" I said the truth. Now I was too young to remember the courtroom reaction, but according to my father the judge audibly guffawed and the opposing counsel lost all the wind out of his sails. The best OIT moments are when your opposing counsel or opposing client says or does something that wins the case for you. True. In civil cases you usually know what will happen ahead of time. But in my state discovery in smaller civil cases is more limited. And clients don't always want to spend $30,000 when we can get the same result for $10,000. In an adverse possession case the witness only needed to say I used that area as my backyard. And I fully expected him to say this. It would harm my case. But I knew I could get around it. When asked about his use of the area, he said, "No, I never really went back there. Didn't use it at all. Lost the case for the other side. And I could barely keep a straight face." It was completely opposite of what the witness had told opposing counsel off the record. Apparently the under penalty of perjury made him change his story. I had another case about losing multi-unit dwelling insurance because a guy's place was a fire hazard. I asked him if his personal insurer knew about the fire hazard. Yeah. And the jerks cancelled my policy. I also love it when I have a difficult party on the other side and the judge rips them a new one. I had a convoluted case with a lot of parties about nothing at all. The plaintiff was heinous. The 6 or 7 attorneys were working out calendars with the judge when the plaintiff starts yelling at her attorney from across the courtroom because she didn't like that he had conceded some little non-issue. Judge told her to sit down and shut up. I was sad that the case settled because she would have been amazing on the stand. I'm not a lawyer, but a court case I was involved with went this way. My ex-mill was a crazy itch. Me and my wife at the time had cut her off almost completely. Everyone in a hole she would give in and let her mom visit, which always turned out badly. Eventually we got divorced and I got full custody. Mill went nuts and decided to sue me for custody. I looked over the law, and for any form of visitation or custody you need to have had contact in the last 6 months, and she hadn't seen them for over a year. So we go to court. I can't afford a lawyer, but the law was pretty clear. She goes through 3 lawyers. Each of them quit in turn. So she finally winds up representing herself. During the last hearing she was talking to the judge and said something to the effect of, "I don't want to get custody of them. I just want to be able to visit." The judge then asked her point blank, "This is a custody hearing. Are you telling me you no longer want to get custody?" She said yes, and the judge dismissed the case immediately. Medical malpractice defense lawyer here representing hospitals' doctors. This was not my own moment but plaintiff's own moment. For context, usually at trial, both plaintiff and defendant will have an expert physician testify as to their opinion to whether the hospital performed everything correctly. I thoroughly researched plaintiff's expert, who was an OB-GYN, baby delivery, and found out he had been suspended a number of times for his own botched deliveries and giving incorrect medical testimony to help plaintiff's cases. During the actual day of trial, turns out he was not licensed to practice medicine independently without supervision from another physician, and he was 1 year into his 3-year suspension. Plaintiff's lawyers had no idea about their own expert's background, and they just sat there with a blank look on their face. Needless to say, during cross-examination, he destroyed his credibility and won at trial. Not a lawyer, but shared an odd moment with one. I hit something in the road and had a tire blowout while driving home from MEPS. Hit a concrete divider and wound up rolling my car. No injuries and no other vehicles involved. Received a reckless driving ticket that the officer told me was just procedure and not to be concerned with. Fast forward a month and I'm in court with my lawyer, who plans on pointing out this ticket could prevent my hardship enlistment. He's not expecting it to take more than a minute because the issuing officer and prosecutor are on board. Cue group poet moment. I'm fourth on the docket and the judge has just handed out maximum sentences for all 3 prior defendants. People are getting 6 to 12 months, having licenses revoked. For little stuff. Prosecutor gets screamed at the instant he opens his mouth. Police officer is told to shut up while answering a question the judge asked. My lawyer is told he's about to be held in contempt. I'm starting to think I'm gonna get 3 squares and a cot. Just not where I planned on getting them. The judge told me to step forward while shuffling my case paperwork, and my lawyer just gave me a look that said, "I'm so sorry. Case dismissed in the interest of justice, and if any more idiots waste his time with nonsense like this again, everyone is spending the night in county." Not in the courtroom but just outside when, right before my first jury trial, the opposing counsel is walking up and down the hallway shaking hands with the sheriffs, the court admin personnel, a few judges and other lawyers. I was an out-of-town lawyer. Did I mention this was my first jury trial? Who was hoping to just not get lost. Anyway, I won. Semicolon. I was involved in a pretty messy custody case. The other party was a mess and had kept the child from my client for a few weeks. OP was playing lots of stupid games and kept requesting continuances. I requested a drug test, which the judge ordered. However, the OP didn't show up for it. To clarify, he did show up. He just stood in front of the toilet for literally 2 hours and claimed he couldn't pee. I was representing the plaintiff, so the burden was on me. I called multiple witnesses that testified to the defendant's drug use. So, opposing counsel decides to call their client for direct examination and asks, "You don't use heroin and crack, right?" That is, for the non-lawyers, a very stupid question for many reasons, especially considering his client didn't show up for his drug test. However, I fully expected the defendant to just lie and say he was clean. After the question was asked, there was a really long pause and the defendant said, "Yes, I do both of those drugs." My head almost exploded. I didn't ask any questions on cross-examination because I didn't want to muddy the waters. I won, and the child is doing great. Not a lawyer. Wife is, but she was just watching. Making his statement before the sentencing, the defendant, who molested a stepdaughter, her friend and a niece, pulled a knife from God knows where, and stabbed himself twice before getting wrestled to the ground. How he got it through the metal detector, no one knows. He lived through that but died 2 months later in prison of natural causes. Not a lawyer, but a defendant. As a teenager, I got busted with a couple of buddies throwing eggs at cars. We were only actually in the courtroom for our sentencing. There was no trial. The judge called each of us up individually to ask us if we had anything to say. One of my friends tells the judge that he is a good kid who doesn't normally do things like this. Lie. We used to do it all the time. And that I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I wish there was a video of my other friend and I sitting in the benches watching this happen. We simultaneously dropped our heads into our hands because we couldn't believe that idiot just said that. The judge was not pleased, and she took the opportunity to remind him that going to a store, buying eggs, going to another location across town, and then throwing those eggs at cars was not just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Not me but my former law partner. She was in court representing a client, I think in a hearing for a restraining order against her soon-to-be ex-husband. Our client was telling the judge that when they met to exchange the children for visitation, the ex had kicked her. He immediately angrily shouted, "She can't prove it. I didn't leave a mark." Thanks, buddy. Not a lawyer, but I got in enough trouble in my teens to know what a judge doesn't like. Uncle's father decide they're going to conserve my grandmother and put her in a secured perimeter memory facility. In reality, they just wanted to piss away her $20 million estate. We end up in court with our lawyers. One thing I know about most judges' courtrooms, they want to be revered like a church. No talk back, no talking out of turn. Wear a suit, even if it's a $20 Goodwill suit. Father, uncles all show up. All of them spend about an hour bad mouthing me. I'm keeping my mouth shut, looking at my feet. One of my uncles tries to examine me. I just keep my mouth shut until the judge tells him he's not a lawyer. And I'm not examination. None of them are well dressed. Sneakers, dirty sweatpants. My uncle, who's the ringleader, decides to start talking over his own lawyers. My lawyer makes some comment. The judge starts talking to her and my uncle's lawyer says something like, "Now hold on ladies." All they had to do was keep their mouths shut and not tell their lawyers how to do their job and they would have won. They pretty much handed grandma and I the win. During jury selection, I can't be a juror due to the fact I'm kinda racist. I'm not the lawyer, but it's a classic lit TV moment in Quebec. The guy's old, must be at least 90. He's being sued by his daughters, who accuse him of sexual assault. This is on Live TV, on one of Quebec's biggest news network. Translation by U/6 data is better than mine. More than I'm not guilty. I've never slept with my daughters. I never beat my daughters. I never touched my daughters. Except for one time at the cabin. I swear. You can probably hear his lawyer facepalming hard. Here is a video, in French. Left square bracket. Not in court but at a tribunal. And also I was plaintiff. Suing for wrongful termination. My rep. So you terminated him because he was ill. Employer. Yes. NR. And he was ill because he is disabled. Employer. Yes. NR. So you fired someone for being disabled. Employer. Yes. Edit. Formatting and a word, comma.